Hey Axis and Allies players, this is the Good Captain. Welcome to my 5th video in my 12-part series on Axis and Allies Anniversary Edition. In this video we will discuss the 5th and final official optional rule in this game. It's titled Fighter Escorts and Interceptors. For those of you who don't know, this rule acts essentially as an extra layer of defense against strategic bombing raids. I'm going to start first by reviewing the rule while concurrently giving an example of the rule in action so we can slowly go through this step by step and understand what's going on. After I've done that, I'm going to give a hopefully brief recap on strategic bombing raids and their effectiveness, and that's to demonstrate why this optional rule, in my opinion, is very necessary for properly balancing Axis and Allies Anniversary Edition. So let's first zoom in and take a look at the first paragraph in this rule. So here it is from the official errata. Fighters can participate in strategic bombing raids. Attacking fighters may escort and protect the bombers, and they can originate from any territory range permitting. Any or all defending fighters based in a territory that is strategically bombed can participate in the defense of the industrial complex. The number of fighters that will defend is decided after the attacker's combat movement phase is completed and before the combat phase begins. Okay, so I've gone ahead and set up a specific example here, and we're going to assume that it's the American player's turn and they've decided to conduct a strategic bombing raid. During their combat movement, they declare that both bombers and both fighters out of C-Zone 7 from the carrier will attempt a strategic bombing raid against the German industrial complex. So the bombers each move 3 spaces, and the fighters each move 2 spaces. Now the American player declares that his combat movement phase is over, and at this point, after seeing all the other moves the American player has made, the German player can decide to send up any fighters in the territory as interceptors. And of course, for purposes of this example, if nothing else, the German player will declare the single fighter in Germany to rise up as an interceptor to challenge this strategic bombing raid. Now let's go ahead and read the second paragraph. After anti-aircraft fire is resolved against the attacking air units, if there are any defending fighters, an air battle occurs between the attacking and defending air units. This combat is resolved in the same way as a normal combat, with a few exceptions. The fighters have an attack value of 1, 2 if the attacker has the jet power research breakthrough, and a defense value of 2, and the bombers have no attack value. In addition, the combat lasts for only 1 round. After the battle, any surviving bombers proceed to carry out the raid as normal. Okay, there's a lot going on in this little paragraph. I think the best thing to do is create a faux battle board and go through the sequence step by step. So as per the rule, the anti-aircraft gun actually fires first in this version of Escorts and Interceptors. Again, the key sentence here is the first one in the second paragraph. After anti-aircraft fire is resolved against the attacking air units. Okay, that's the operative sentence fragment. And if you don't believe me, I will link a link in the description box below to the .org website where I specifically asked a clarifying question and got Krieghund to respond. And again, Krieghund is Larry Harris's right-hand man as regards these rules and rules clarifications. There is nothing more gospel other than the rule book itself. So this is how this works. This is not how this works in global, I know, but that is how this works here. So the anti-aircraft gun will get to fire 4 dice at the attacking aircraft. Now the escorts and interceptors will actually exchange fire, and only the escorts and interceptors. This is another difference between global and the anniversary version of escorts and interceptors. Fighters attack at a 1. Bombers do not attack, and defending fighters defend on a 2 or less. So let's see what happens in this case. It looks like both fighters missed, and now we go to the third and final phase. And the third and final phase is, of course, the bombing of the industrial complex itself by surviving bombers. In this case, there are 2 bombers. We'll say that they roll a combined total of 6. 6 damage tokens are then placed under the industrial complex. And we go back to the strategic map. And this part is fairly self-explanatory. Attacking fighters and bombers return to friendly territories, and the defending fighters return to the territory from which they came. Now, We're going to read the third and final paragraph in there because there is one small exception. And here it is. Fighters participating as either an escort or a defender cannot participate in other battles during that turn. Self-explanatory. Defending interceptors must return to their original territory. If that territory is captured, the fighters may move one space to land in a friendly territory or on a friendly aircraft carrier. This movement occurs after all the attacker's combats have been resolved and before the attacker's non-combat move phase begins. If no such landing space is available, the fighters are lost. So if Germany fell in this example, the fighter would be able to land in France or the Balkans or some other friendly adjacent territory or aircraft carrier. That's all this means. So this concludes the example of how Fighter Escorts and Interceptors optional rule works in Anniversary Edition. I'm now going to argue why this optional rule is absolutely vital for a chance at a balanced game. So to lay some of the groundwork for this argument here, first I need to highlight that I already have a video where I essentially argue that strategic bombing raids, even in Axis and Allies Classic, where bombers are worth 15 IPCs, are worth it on an infinite timeline. 1 in 6 bombers will more than likely be downed. The other 5 will more than likely get through. Of course, there's some variability there. But the 5 bombers that get through will cause an average damage of 17 or 18 IPCs, which is, of course, greater than the cost of the lost bomber. And there are other arguments I make in that video, but the math is essentially the same here, except for one crucial factor. The cost of a bomber in Axis and Allies Anniversary is 12. When the cost of a bomber has been reduced by 20%, you're now causing 5 to 6 more IPCs worth of damage than 2 to 3 more IPCs worth of damage than the cost of a bomber. And this creates an imbalance that the United States, in particular in this game, can take advantage of. And I'm now going to show you how this is done. I call this strategy green skies because if you are playing a game where you're not using fighter escorts and interceptors, the United States is uniquely positioned to take advantage of the lack of this rule more than any other power. Even when the United States loses the Philippines, it's still producing 38 IPCs per turn. This allows the United States player to build 3 bombers per turn. This is in addition to the 2 that the United States starts with at the beginning of the game. So on turn 1, you'll move both bombers into the United Kingdom and produce 3 more. On turn 2, you will strategically bomb either Germany or Italy, both of which are 3 spaces away, and begin the saturation bombing of your opponent. On the following turn, you'll use the 4 or 5 bombers present to continue the bombing. And on the following turn after that, you can see the math here. The number of bombers grows and grows. The end result that you're looking for as the American player is that you essentially seize both the Italian and German economy. You'll have enough bombers to separate between these 2 industrial complexes that the Italians will be unable to repair the damage, and they'll have to skip turns, essentially saving 1 round's IPCs for use to clear the damage and actually purchase a unit or 2 on the following turn. And Germany, which is has a little bit more robust economy, can then be pummeled harder. Okay, there is a little bit of modulation as the Allied player that is required. You obviously don't want to send 4 bombers against an Italian industrial complex that has say 9 damage tokens on it, right? Because the cost would not be worth the gain in this case. Do not send more than is necessary to flatten the economies. There's a very crucial next step to this green skies strategy that I'll get to very quickly. But first, let me pay some lip service to what the other 2 Allied powers should be doing in this case. The Russians should be doing their best to secure Finland and Norway just as quickly as possible. And the British, even more crucially, should be doing their best to secure Africa, namely this land zone right here, Libya. And here we get to the next crucial step, and that is relocating the American Air Force to Libya as soon as it is able. It's relatively easy to do. All American bombers in the United Kingdom whether they're bombing Germany or Italy, will be able to fly to Libya. All at-start fighters from the American Air Force should try to get there as well. And why are we doing this? Libya is a unique land territory with regards to this strategy, because not only can the American Air Force still bomb Italy and Germany just as well as it could have from the United Kingdom, but they're able to project their power into the middle of the board, which is an area that is crucial to Japanese expansion. Specifically, C-Zone 34 and C-Zone 35 become naval dead zones due to the amount of American air power located in Libya, with fighters in Egypt especially using these as sort of soak units or protection for the bombers. A Japanese player is going to be highly deterred from ever entering these two sea zones, and instead either build very expensive naval warships to try to defeat it, or more likely stay hemmed up in sea zones farther away from the front. You can, in a sense, break the game in favor of the Allies with this strategy. That is not the only reason, though, that I say it's absolutely necessary for its use. Let's say you and your playgroup decide that the American player cannot bomber spam. Okay, let's say you put a limit on bombers for the United States player to try to avoid this sort of thing from happening. Well, like a relay race, the baton merely passes to another power, and that other power is Germany. Germany then has the option of doing what I just showed you, but for the Axis. If the German player builds a bomber every other turn, you don't have to do this as extremely as the United States because the target is much weaker. But if the German player built a bomber every other turn or every third turn, you'd have enough bombers to seize the Russian economy in much the same way I just demonstrated with the US Air Force. So it's my strong opinion that if you play Axis and Allies Anniversary, you should absolutely use the optional rule Escorts and Interceptors. So this concludes my argument. I'm going to recap this video, and then we're going to do a sort of special closing, being this is the last video specifically focused on the optional rules, and the next video will be the first strategic video. So I started this video by reviewing the rule Fighter Escorts and Interceptors and showing an example of the rule in action. And then I transitioned to some of the statistics behind strategic bombing and why it's so lethal, especially in this version of the game without this optional rule. Finally, I showed how the American player is uniquely positioned to really take advantage of the lack of fighter escorts and interceptors. Barring that, Germany can do something similar, and both strategies are quite devastating to the game. It's why I feel very strongly that this optional rule is necessary for a chance at a balanced game. And now we come to a sort of a special closing. It's necessary to clear up which optional rules I'll be using in the strategic videos, right? There are, again, 5 optional rules. This is the 5th video. So when I do my strategic videos, I have them calibrated in what I think is the most obvious way to set them up that gives no side a decisive advantage, and that is the following. This is a very simple document that I've linked in the description box below. It's available for download on the .org website. It goes through each one of the optional rules in this game so that you and your opponents can be very clear about what you're using and what you're not using. And in my very strong opinion, at least these 4, number 3, 4, 5, and 6, need to be calibrated in this way to have a balanced game. If they're not calibrated this way, I feel strongly that I've shown you, the viewer, how to take advantage of that optional rule and bend it in your favor. So these are the optional rules that I'll be using in my strategic videos. I will announce this at the top of each strategic video just to make sure that any new viewers understand that that's what's going on here. But that concludes this video. Let me know what you think about strategic bombing and escorts and interceptors in general in the comment section below. And let me know what you think about my selection of optional rules here. Do you agree? Do you disagree? Why or why not? Thanks for watching this. All the best from the good captain, and bye-bye.